That's what happened in level 4. Yo, oh, he poking the fuck out that nigga.
He get him all in the face.
He poking him.
He got him in the neck.
Look out, man.
He got him in the neck. Look, he's sticking that motherfucker in his neck.
Oh,
What's up, everybody? I'm Blessed and Free. Welcome back to another episode of DOC TV. So if you're tuning in for the first time and you don't recognize this guy, he's been on the channel before. We did a part 1 interview about, his time being in Nortenos and the California prison system. So I'm going to go ahead and link that in the description so you guys can check that out. He's got a YouTube channel too. You guys go check that out. It's the Homie Hangout. Small channel just starting out, man. Go support this dude. He's a solid cat. So he was in prison where we left off, and you were like kind of going over the racial guidelines of what goes on in the California prison system. So take it away, man.
And I'm happy to be back, man. I appreciate the work that you're doing. So
I appreciate that.
And so, like I said, I'm the homie Joshua. I have a channel called the Homie Hangout. We were talking about the racial dynamics and how that really plays into how people organize in prison, who people are accountable to. There's really not any free reign to sort of do what you want or associate with who you want in the California system. That does not mean everybody is in a gang, quote unquote, or everybody's a part of an organized group. But it does mean that everybody falls up under somebody. And so, at least in my experience in there, and I'm sure maybe on some of the lower, like farm type yards, that might be a little bit different. But
what's the farm type yards? What is that?
So, the California system has level 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? With 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest. And then you have the shoot program, which isn't really a level. It's just 23 hours a day.
Yeah, you're in the box basically.
Right. And so the lower ones, like level 1s. That's where you're working on like an honor farm type of environment. You most likely live in a dorm. That dorm's probably pretty open. Your food is probably pretty decent. You might be part of the fire camp. They have a history of using incarcerated volunteer, quote unquote, fire people. We have a lot of fires out here. And those people get paid.
So so when you go into the prison system, what classifies you there to either go to a farm or to like a level 4 prison?
Sure. So when you're in reception center, you go to classification and they look at your whole history and then just some kind of factors like, are you married, right? Have you worked before? What's your level of education? Your commitment offense or the crime that you were convicted of to go to prison has a lot to do with it, especially if you're a first termer. Do you have a prior history in prison and what was your behavior like and your discipline like? And it's a point system and they change it every handful of years. So I can't say exactly what the point ranges are now, but normally you get into, I think, high 30s, early 40s and you're going level 4. Think level 3 was like between 28 and 35 or something.
So level 4 is where, like, when you go in, you're running with someone.
Yeah, so level 4 yard is the most serious yard you're gonna come across, right? A lot of level 4s, you don't see a lot of fighting. If you do see fighting, it's just so that the hitter gets away, right? But there's a lot of knife play. There's a lot of weapon play. It's more strict generally. The respect factor is higher. And so you try to reduce conflict when you can because the consequences of that conflict are so high. You're probably going to be on lockdown a lot for different incidences.
And that's ran strictly by the gangs? Like all the stuff you're talking about is ran in a program in each gang? Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of people that hit their own. It's called kind of cleaning house. And you're under a gun constantly as a level 4, right? Whereas as the levels drop, like level 1 and 2, you're not under a gun. They have perimeter guns for the prison, but like in your dorm, there's no catwalk with a CO walking around with a rifle, right? There's oftentimes not even like a tower type setup within the building because you're in a more open space. level 3s, you have a control room inside your building. And so, and that cop has a block gun and he has a rifle and he can reach just about anywhere in the section. And then you also have gunners, on the yard, and, that makes a difference in people's behavior too.
So when you're at those prisons, man, on like the level floor yards, do the gangs have the officers under control too? Like, is there a relationship as far as like the corruption goes?
No, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
I'd hesitate to say that there's a working relationship. There's always exceptions, of course. You won't find that very much in dealing with Northerners or Southerners, because there's a lot stricter, policies in terms of what individuals are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, right?
And you mean like, so you're not allowed to talk friendly with an officer. You can never be seen talking to them. Is it stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't talk to them one-on-one, right? For sure. It doesn't mean that you have a harsh demeanor towards them all the time. There's a benefit to not having a CO sweat you, right? And so
going under the radar.
right. And so being respectful and stuff is one thing, but collaborating is another, right? Now with cell phones, they didn't have cell phones when I was in there, but with the cell phones, I think there's more collaboration because the majority of those phones come through COs or other free staff that work in the prison. There's not a bunch of people getting iPhones during visiting and hooping them, right? And so
that's crazy. So that happens, huh? They're hooping phones like that.
I've heard of people hooping phones.
I've heard of it in my county jail, bro. There was a dude that came in and they set him down in the X-ray thing that you sit in.
Yeah. And
he had a freaking like an actual touch screen phone in his ass, bro.
Yeah, that's to me, that's kind of next level stuff, right?
That's next level.
That's not something that I could picture, nor that I really want to, but
well, I think in the prison genre, man, there's a lot of, prison channels coming out of Cali. And when I think it first hit, everybody talked about like hooping, like it was no thing. And out East, it's not so much like that, but there's a reason in Cali that people are doing it. And that's because I think the politics kind of force you in a position to where you have to.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know anybody that's run with the North or frankly with the South that hasn't had to hoop something, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that a large amount of people, amongst the whites and the blacks and the others have done so as well. It's just a part of the game, man. It's a part of the environment. You get some paperwork, you get some information that's privileged information, or that's information that you don't want to get intercepted. You got to have somewhere to put it, right?
Yeah, your driver's license.
And that's the place that you're most likely to get away with having something, quote unquote, secured. That's what we say, bro. You got to secure that, and then weapons and that sort of thing too. But I'd say more often than not, it's paperwork, that people are hooping. And so,
have you ever heard of the Green Wall? It was a thing that went. So I interviewed. Yeah. So I interviewed the guy that was like the whistleblower for that. Yeah. I forget his name, man, but I'll get it to you. But when you were in prison, was that thing, the Green Wall, like going on when you were in there?
It was. And so we didn't get assaulted necessarily on the yard that I was at, but I've heard of stuff they did. And part of it is just jerk moves, right?
Ego.
They would, Slim's Valley would get hot, right? And over there, when it's time to get down, you got to actually prone out, right? You can't just squat down. Some prisons you can kind of squat down and they're okay with that.
So for the people watching that don't know, so when you say that, you're talking about when they're laying the yard down?
Right. Okay. Right. An alarm goes off, right? And whether you know what the alarm is for, or whether you can see a conflict, it doesn't matter. That alarm goes off, you lay down, right? Because that's laying the yard down. And the alarm can go off because something happened in a different part of the prison, right? You never know. Sometimes it goes off just from a CO bumping their alarm somewhere and it goes off. And so over here, you have to prone out, on the ground, which people don't generally like doing anyways. But they'd leave us out there for like 30, 40 minutes, man, on a false alarm. And
Just
everybody
laid out on the rec yard.
Yeah, and it's hot as heck on that.
So they're on
asphalt.
some like fuck boy type shit.
Right. And you see all the COs just standing around and talking with each other. And you're like, look, man, it's a false alarm. Stay down. Alarm hasn't cleared. But you ain't going nowhere. Like, we don't need
they're fucking with you the whole time.
Right.
I hate it. That's the shit that makes me not want to go back to prison right there.
Right.
Having to deal with that shit, bro.
And they would do that often, right? They would do that often. They wound up firing or laying off all the free staff. So like all the teachers, the GED teachers, everything else, most of the vocational stuff, except the kitchen, of course, they laid all those people off. They said, man, you guys are on lockdown so much. It's a waste for us to pay these people because nobody can go to the class. Well, then when you do get off lockdown, you have less privileges, quote unquote, because you don't have a job and you're not in school, right? And so you can't go to the yard as much. You can't get as much on canteen. You're not entitled to these certain normal things. And it's not because you're choosing not to program. It's because there's nothing for you to do. They took those opportunities away. And so little stuff like that, man, seemingly little stuff, when you're incarcerated, everything's magnified and everybody has a routine. And when you start messing with that, guys will go crazy and guys will lose their shit,
That was gonna be my next question. When you were in there, man, like, when you do time, you kind of get into the mode of doing time, and a lot of things shifts and changes in your life. When you were in prison, man, like especially towards the end, where was your mind at?
I still thought I was just going to be in prison, to be honest, right?
Because of catching charges that would keep you in there longer.
I just assumed something was going to happen. Okay. And I was in the SHU program during all that time, and so the actual odds that you pick up like a write-up in the SHU is pretty slim. We're really disciplined in how we interact with COs. So we're not yelling on the door and, throwing piss on cops and that kind of stuff. That's just unacceptable behavior. That's, self monitored. Very rarely at the time I was up there, it's really rare for them to pop the doors, two different groups, right? Because then it's going to be a bloodbath, right? And most people back there are very serious. The North and South actually had a policy because it was happening so much and folks were dying, right? Folks were getting shot by the gunners. It was a game. North and South had a policy where if the doors opened up on quote unquote accident, then you stand your ground, prepared to defend yourself, but don't be the aggressor. And so as long as both sides are agreeing not to be the aggressor, there's not going to be violence. Now that policy did not extend to our interactions with everybody that was considered opposition. But it did extend with them because we had both agreed that it was just a setup by the COs to kill us, right? And so got tired of giving them that. And so, anyways, it's difficult to get a write-up. I wasn't allowed to have a cellie because of a conflict with a cellie that I had years prior in AdSec. And so I wasn't thinking of going home, not until my last year.
What made it hit you? What made it hit you in your last year?
Like, man, my date is actually coming up. I didn't think about my date very often, right? Because I just assumed, I assumed when I went in there, I'm probably not going to get out. And not because I was this torpedo or I was over eager to prove myself or anything, but I don't turn down nothing, right? So I'm not trying to present myself as this big tough guy that was running around killing everybody, right? I did what I had to do and, got involved in stuff at time. And thankfully didn't get caught for anything major. But I just assumed that along the line, something's going to happen, right? I'm going to be called on to do something, or I'm going to be put in a position where I have to do something just kind of based on my own personal integrity, and I'm going to get caught up for it. And so that last year, I started thinking, man, I might actually go home. And it was scary.
I bet, especially after not thinking that,
Right. So now, man, what am I going to do? And I was a part of the first group that was able to take college classes from the Pelican Bay SHU, correspondence classes from a community college hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And so I did that, a little bit, and I got good grades, really good grades, right? I got straight A's. And I thought, wow, maybe I'm kind of sharp, right? Like I never graduated 7th grade in traditional school. I got my GED being locked up previously. I was like, hey, maybe there's something I can do here, right, when I get out. So then I started thinking, I'm gonna get out and go to college, which I wound up doing, not right away, because the size of the campus and the complexity of the process was just way too overwhelming for me, fresh out of prison.
I can't even imagine. I
Yeah.
mean, getting out of prison alone, all the sensory overload. And
Right.
now you're walking around in a fucking college campus.
Right. Yeah, no. And to be clear, I wasn't walking around. I pulled up in a car. I see
You
this
didn't even
mass
get
of
out?
people. I see this mass of people. I get out of the car in the parking lot, and like there's these, big steps going up, and there's just buildings and people and cars and music, and I'm like, oh, nope, sorry, I'm taking off. I didn't want no part of that, man. Like I said, I wound up going and succeeding in academics fairly well, but so that kind of helped me, right? Because it gave me the idea of something to do. I had family I was coming home to, right? I didn't have any kids. I didn't have an old lady anymore. And so I didn't have those pressures, and it was still rough, but certainly not as rough as some other people got it.
What was the hardest thing for you, like coming back out into society and having to deal with?
Honestly, it was, and I had just done a video on this recently, the start of what I think will be a series on mental health. It was the mental stuff, man. It was feeling like I didn't belong, feeling like I was incapable of doing basic society things, right? Like ordering a sandwich, walking around. I didn't know how to dress. Everything was new. And so it was kind of like being a 2-year-old, but in a, 30-year-old body, a ton of experience in life, but feeling like it felt like I'd never been out there. And that took a while to adjust to. Driving around areas that I was familiar with as a teenager, and they don't look the same anymore. Trying to figure out who am I going to hang out with, who am I going to spend time with, because I was a 19-year-old street gang member running around with a bunch of other gang members for the most part, right? Now what do I do? And I've been gone, and people forget about you, and stuff changes. And so my whole identity, I think the challenge was figuring out who I was. And to be honest, in some ways, that's still happening 16 years later.
Still happening for me, brother.
Yeah, I didn't know how to do anything, man. I didn't know how to be in a relationship, right? I didn't really know how to flirt, to be honest. But I wanted to be in a relationship. I wanted to go buy a house. I wanted to have kids. I wanted to make up for lost time. And I made some moves that in hindsight weren't very wise because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And then I had to deal with the consequences of that much later.
Way later.
Yeah. And the whole thing, I feel like these last couple years has been like a reboot for me in the sense of adjusting to being out here. Even though, like I said, it's been many years since I've been home. But just because of some stuff that's happened in my life and kind of things being turned upside down and being, to some degree, really just alone, right? And my kids and I had to, you get to soul searching, man. You get to digging and that was the first time I went out to a restaurant by myself. I'd never been to a restaurant by myself prior to this, and just little stuff, and didn't always make the best choices with this quote unquote freedom, right? Of my situation, and so had to relearn that stuff again, right? And boundaries and responsible behavior.
I think a lot of people don't understand like why we even tell our story, man, and that's because. Like you literally were a young kid, man, and you made one bad decision. Everything a normal person learns as they evolve into a man and get older, like life stuff, responsibilities, bills, taxes, all that type of shit. I didn't know any of that, bro. I just filed taxes for the first time in my life, like 4 years ago. It's good for young people to hear this, man, because rolling in that car with that Nina, thinking you're about that life and then you have to restart your whole life over, man. So yeah. I salute you for doing that. During the time when it was rough for you, man, and you were going through your trials and tribulations, how did you get through it? What made you keep wanting to go forward in life?
Good question. So I think there was two things. One, I had some family around me that the way I put it is they reminded me of the person that I said I wanted to be before I walked out of prison. And that was really helpful. And they were there really without judgment, right? With even without kind of huge expectations, especially at first. They were just there, right? And didn't necessarily have answers, but they showed up. And I think that had a big role to play in how I was able to get on my feet. I think the other thing, and stay on my feet, frankly, you know, through these years. And when I stumble and I fall and I hit a rough spot, man, it's they always come through, right? But they have my whole life, you know. And so like my sisters and stuff, man, they rock with me, right? And they came to visit me in prison, and they, you know, we were close before. And
Is one of your fears, man, losing your family?
yes, and thankfully, I only lost one person family-wise that was close to me while I was in there, and she was trying to hang on and died just a couple months before I paroled. That was rough. I mean, I like homeboys and stuff I had fall off and overdose or die or, you know, suicide, whatever. But which, not to say that's painless, but it wasn't life altering. Yeah, it wasn't life altering. And the other thing that got me through was helping other people, telling my story, and not just telling my story, trying to help other folks, you know, the whole expression, right? Homie, helping others move in excellence. I started working with young folks. You know, I was in the hood, and it's a trip because it was kind of like when I was younger, right? Like I'm just in the hood, posted up. But I'm
on a different mission.
Yeah. I'm helping people, and over the years, man, you know, we sent kids to college, and you know, I was doing stuff up at the juvenile hall and different high schools and everything else, ranging from Bible studies to what to expect when you go to prison for the youngsters that were direct files. And we, you know, we had groups in the community. I set up midnight soccer, midnight basketball, all kinds of stuff, and built some really good relationships. And some of those relationships with young people extend to this day, right? And they come by, and my kids know them. I had a bunch of people living in my house for a while, for years, right, off and on. And so, and during that time, I'm having a family, right? My daughter's born, then my second daughter's born, and that provided a level of accountability to me. You know, last thing I want to be is a hypocrite, and there was a microscope on me, and so I needed to lead by a positive example, but I also had to be transparent about the struggle, right? Because life ain't a bed of roses, man, as we know, and that's true even for people that haven't done time. And so,
Facts.
you know, I dove into that. And some might say I dove into it too much. I was always out there. And, you know, people get killed in the streets. A lot of times I know the shooter, and I know the person that's being covered up with that little foil blanket, right? And then to see the moms come out, and for the cops to finally come and tell them, yes, that's your son, right? And people hooting and hollering and screaming and wanting to retaliate, and I know that pain, right? And so trying to be there for them while us also understanding the depth of pain. So